Hello, Bighara here. Been a while. I'm doing something a little different. Excuse the bizarre lighting. This is relevant to what I'm up to. Um, I do a lot of miniature paintings, and I mentioned this in one of my earlier video blogs about RPGing with minis. In this video, and if people like it, in a series of several other videos, I'm going to talk a little about the actual painting of minis. And I've kind of been playing around in my basement and setting up things so that I can actually show some of what I do when I'm working on minis. So in this first video, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a fairly basic mini that you would use for a player character or an NPC, and I'm going to show step by step what I do to prepare the mini. Let me mention that I am not a display or Golden Demon tournament winning competition level painter. I paint to play. And what I'm going to be doing is showing you the steps I take to get a mini ready to put it on the table. And that's my philosophy when it comes to painting. Occasionally I'll try and push myself a little more and try and make something a little fancier, but 99% of the time when I'm painting or if I'm making scenery or terrain or anything like that, my goal is to get it onto the table so it looks decent, so it's usable in play. It's not something that's going to go up on a shelf and never be touched. It's not something that's going to go into a competition. It's for gaming. I will also say that almost all the gaming I do is RPG. I don't do a whole lot of wargaming. I do play a few skirmishes, like I've mentioned in the past, Song of Blades and Heroes, which I enjoy a lot. But I'm not a Warhammer 40k gamer. I do paint some of those minis. In fact, I was painting up some Space Marines the other day. Mostly because it's fun, and mostly because I'm toying with the idea of running a Dark Heresy game at some point, so some 40k minis might be cool, again, but for gaming. So anyway, this first step, I'm going to talk about what I do when I first get the mini and first getting it ready to paint. And then in later videos, we'll talk about the actual application of paint and things like putting it on a base and stuff like that. I envision this being, for this particular mini that I'm going to use, 2 to 3 videos of like 15 minutes or so each. So, without further ado, I'm going to switch to the scene where you can actually see what I'm doing with my little fingers here, and hopefully you'll learn something. See you later. Okay, so here we go. We're going to be prepping a very basic mini, something you might use in an RPG. For this, I've chosen an oldie but a goodie. This is from an old Games Workshop box set with various types of wizards. You might find this on eBay or something somewhere, but it's not really important. The point is, it's a plastic mini. It's a fairly simple sculpt, but it gives you some of the basics about how to get things ready for the table. So here we go. It's a nice little sort of a druid, wizard, nature looking fellow. And it's on your plastic sprue, which is very typical of a plastic mini. And what we're going to do is, first thing we need to do is we need to remove it from the sprue. For that, I'm going to use a little pair of hobby clippers, and we're going to go ahead, and you want to use the flat edge of this. You see how it has a tapered edge and a flat edge. You want to use a flat edge toward the mini, not this way, because you want to keep it flush as much as possible. So we're going to get in here very gently. We're trying to avoid clipping on the mini itself, and that comes loose. And then the only other points we have are down here at the bottom. See here where the base is. So I'm going to go in here. It's kind of tight, but that's okay. Come out from the side. And down here isn't such a big deal because it is the base and it's not something that's going to be seen, but still, good habits. There we go. And, you know, maybe you have a use for this. I don't know, but we're done with that for right now. So, here we have our little wizard mini. Now, at first you'd say, well, he's ready to go. He's all assembled, and he's you don't need to glue anything or anything like that. But if you look at it, the way these are made is the mold takes 2 halves and presses it together. So what you're going to end up with, if you look carefully, is you'll see, let me borrow this as a pointer, seams running along here, which don't look like a lot, but they're there, and they do detract from the overall paint job when you're done. You can see it also here along the cloak. And it's not a big deal, but it'll look nicer if we can get rid of those. There's a couple ways you can do that. I'm going to be using just a basic X-Acto knife. There are also little hobby files that you can get. There are 3 little files in here of various fineness and shape. But for simplicity, let's start with the X-Acto knife. Start with a nice sharp blade. I like the number 10. That's sort of a pointed one. Lets you get into the little crevices and stuff. And you're going to spend a minute and you're going to look over the Mini and you're going to try and spot where the various seams and such are. One of the obvious places is look at where you had to clip the Mini off the sprue, because that's going to leave sometimes these little blisters like this. We're not worried so much about the ones in the bottom, but just so you know what they look like. Now we clipped it over here near the staff, so I'm kind of looking along here. Looks okay. Not too rough. So I'm just going to give this a very light pass. You can also see a long seam running along the staff. That's not so obvious because it's going to match in pretty nicely with the wood grain, but I'm still going to give that a little pass. What I'm doing is I'm taking the edge of the blade like this, putting it 90 degrees to the surface of the Mini, and very lightly, especially with resin and plastic, scraping this along the edge. And then what I'm doing is I'm just flattening that ridge a little bit. You can also see a little of it here along the knuckles of the finger, which is not ideal. It's hard to get rid of all that, especially on something like this soft plastic, because you don't want to eliminate too much detail. What I'm doing here is I'm running the edge of the knife between the fingers, between the knuckles a little bit to increase those grooves. So as I very lightly just scrape across, I can get rid of the worst of it without completely messing up the fingers. And then I'm also going to scrape here. It's just a tiny blister here where the sprue was connected. That would almost, in this particular case, make not a bad knot hole on the staff, like a piece of the wood. The other thing is you're doing plastic especially, you tend to get these little shavings, and they can still be attached at one end, so I'm just kind of picking those off. I hope this is showing up okay. The display on my camera makes the image upside down the way it's tipped, so I'm trying to work in a mirror a bit. I'm going to go around the edge of the staff headpiece and try to get rid of any seams there. And you can also, if you look, you might be able to see here there's a little bit in his hair. And so, again, this is like the knuckles. We don't want to obscure too much detail, but I do want to try to de-emphasize that a little bit. And again, this is the idea of, the idea is to have a tabletop-ready Mini. So we're not trying to win a golden demon here. We're not trying to do something that's super world-class display. We're trying to make a presentable Mini on the tabletop. Work my way up the other end of the staff. So if we don't get this 110% perfect, it'll look all right. In fact, to be honest, it would look all right without doing most of this. The paint will hide some of it, and the textures hide some of it, and the fact is, a fully painted Mini on a base looks very nice on the table regardless. It looks so much better than an unpainted Mini, or using a poker chip or pennies or M&Ms or whatever you would normally use. Here I'm getting in at this edge of this sleeve. It's a kind of a tiny place. I'm doing with the very tip, just tiny little flicks, trying to get the worst of it. Again, it can be problematic because you don't have a lot of room to work with, and you don't want to push too hard because you don't want to ruin the detail. There's some little folds in the sleeves here. You know, we'd like to keep that if we could. Alright. And then we're just going to, basically we're working our way around this edge where the two halves came together in the mold process. So this is, and in some areas it's going to be more visible than others. Again, we're working our way down some knuckles because he's holding something in each hand, same as we did before. Again, we have a wooden shaft, so the wood grain, I don't know if you can, how well you can see in the camera here. It goes right along the bottom here. Now this is one of these cases. No one's really going to see this very much because it's on the bottom when you have the mini based and it's, sitting on the table like this. But on the flip side of it, it is a pretty visible scene when you look at it, and it's on a nice flat area, so it is so easy to get rid of. It's almost like, why not? A few passes here, and that's practically going to be invisible. Boom, that was it. So that's your call, whether you feel it's necessary or not. I like to get as much of it as possible because, frankly, there are times when I find a seam I didn't see before, and that's always miserable. You've already primed it, and you're already ready to paint it, and then you say, oh my god, I didn't even see that before. So if I see one, I like to make at least some effort to get rid of it, because there's way too good a chance on some, especially on a complex sculpt with a lot of textures and stuff, that I'm going to miss something, and I really don't want to miss anything. So we're getting there. We've gotten this sleeve, we've gotten his sickle, we've gotten most of it on his head. There's a little seam here. Let's see what we can do with that. That may not be a seam. That may just be an irregularity in the sculpt, but it's a kind of a sharp edge in the middle of a flat piece of fabric. I don't like that, so I'm getting rid of it. Alright, so I'm going to give it a once over. Again, I can still see a little bit of it here on his knuckles, but once that's painted and shaded, most of that's going to be gone. And the other thing you can do is you can see what I'm doing when I'm wiggling it here. What I'm doing is I'm having the light hit it from more than one angle. And that's showing off a shadow I might have missed when I was looking at it from one angle. Like, okay, right there from this angle, I just saw a bit of the seam here on his hair that I had missed before. This is tricky because it's kind of caught between this and the sickle. This is one of the disadvantages of a all-in-one piece mini, because you don't have as much room to move around. But as I say, if you use a nice thin, I misspoke before. I said this was a number 10 blade for the X-Acto. This is actually an 11. But if you get one with a nice tip, and it's a new blade, or it doesn't have to be a new blade for every mini, but not something you've been sawing cardboard or something with before. Something fairly sharp. One, it's safer. It's less likely to catch and slip, so you're less likely to get yourself. Ideally, you should always be moving away from you. You can see I'm not doing that, but you're moving with such small, low-pressure strokes that it's easy to control. I'm not trying to slice through something. I'm very lightly scraping along the edges, so it's not something where there's a lot of risk of it suddenly slipping and catching myself. I mean, it's possible, but it's a calculated risk. Alright, so I'm going to do another once over. Looking in these oddball places, which the truth is pretty unlikely. Okay, so at this point, we have a little wizard mini. Or a druid. He'd be good for that too. He's got some leaves in his hair. He's got his sickle. He's got the ubiquitous Warhammer skull there, but that's okay. Life and death. He's wearing sort of a fur pelt. He's got his long, crazy hair and beard. This would be a great druid mini. He even has an Irish Triskelion kind of Celtic knot symbol on his belt, which is a nice touch. I didn't notice that before. So anybody who wants to play him like a human male druid might get a kick out of a mini like this. It's a perfectly good PC mini. So anyway, that's getting the seams clean. That's getting the mini surface prepped. The next step, which I'm not going to show on camera, is I'm going to just wash this very quickly in some soapy water. The reason is, when they make the minis, when they press them in the molds, when they inject the plastic or the metal or whatever into the molds, the inside of the mold is coated with what's called mold release, and it's essentially the equivalent of spraying a frying pan with Pam or oil or whatever to keep stuff from sticking. It's a non-stick agent, so that the metal or the resin or the plastic or whatever you're using doesn't stick to the surface of the mold, and you get a nice clean extraction. The difficulty there is some of that mold release chemical sticks. Oh, see, I'm just angling it. I just spotted a little more of the seam I thought I got, but it's not there. You know, if you saw, a nice big shaving just came right off, and that's probably 90% of it. So, yeah, that's better. So what happens is some of that mold release chemical sticks to the surface of the Mini and makes things like primer and paint and so forth not stick as well, not cover as well. It's a simple process. A little soap and water, and then let it dry completely, and then when you put the primer on it, you're good to go. Now, some people would take this and they would base it. They would just do a little square base or round base, and they would go ahead and do that and get it glued and get it all ready to go, and that's perfectly fine. In this particular case, I'm not going to do that. What I'm going to do is I'm actually going to prime the Mini separate, and I'm going to base it after I'm done painting it. And the reason for that is because I want to do a little something with the base where I want to make sure that it's got some grass and some leaves, and I want to be able to work on the base a little bit before I attach the Mini, so I don't have to worry about messing up the Mini's paint job while I'm working on the base. You can have Minis which are all of one piece, and we're going to do something with these. We're going to do something with these in a little bit. This is an example of an old Hero Quest orc. I love these guys. They're great. You can find them on eBay and stuff, and you can see how the base is integrated. But if you need like a pile of just plastic orcs and you're not really worried about it, we're going to actually paint some of these up in a later video. But you see how the base is, since it's integrated, you kind of have to deal with the base at the same time no matter what. In this case, we don't have to, so I'm not going to. Sometimes I do, sometimes I don't. It just depends. In this case, especially since he has the big cloak and everything, and when I put this down, there's not going to be much space to work with. Sometimes if you have something where like they're wearing a shirt or pants, or there's more room, you can get in there and do more. In this case, with the druid wizard, I really can't. So I'm going to prime him separately and base him separately. But that's going to be a separate video. In any case, the next step with him, after I wash him and after he's completely dry, is I'm going to prime him. And I'm going to talk a little bit about priming later, but basically there are special spray paints. Here's one from Games Workshop. It's the Citadel spray primer. You can do a spray prime, you can do a brush-on primer, either way. I'm going to use a spray primer because I have a bunch. You can get colored ones. The two most common are black and white. The Army Painter company makes ones that are in various colors, and I actually have some minis that are primed with color primers, and I'll show you some of those at some point. I'm going to do him in white, and the reason I'm going to spray prime him in white is because it tends to allow the colors I put on him afterwards to be brighter. I'm going to be using things like greens and browns, obviously, and I don't want them to look too dark or too muted. I'm not going to try and make them look cartoony, but white primer is good for that. There's an old rule of thumb that you prime monsters in black and you prime PCs and heroes in white. And that's an oversimplification, but there's a logic to that, because the monsters are sort of rank and file, and you're just doing... The nice thing about the black is that it provides sort of instant shading, so if there's a really difficult to reach spot that you can't get to with the paintbrush, it's shadowy, and then the black just provides a shadow. I like to get everything covered, but so a lot of people will prime their monsters and stuff in dark colors. And then the PCs, who you kind of want to stand out, they're the heroes and everything, you do in white, so they're a little bit brighter and their colors are a little more vivid. So anyway, after he's washed and dried, I'm going to go ahead and spray prime him. And I'm going to do that between videos, because otherwise I have to lug the camera outside, because if I'm using spray primer, I'm not going to do that indoors. And you'll see him where he's all covered in sort of a white paint. I'll show you an example of a primed mini. Here's a PC mini, a Reaper elf that I did. I went ahead and put her on the base. You can see that, and went ahead and added some gravel, and we'll talk about this more. But you can see she's covered in just a light dusting of white spray paint. Didn't obscure the details. And I'm going to be painting her up. And as I say, she already has some basic basing glue to on there, and she's already glued onto the base. And like I say, you can totally do that. It's totally fine. That was just a choice I'd made for that one that I'm doing differently for the wizard. Part of the reason is her feet are so close together here. She's standing with one foot right next to each other. It frees up 99% of the base surface is reachable. So if I want to do anything like add a little grass or leaves or something like that, or and when I color in the stones and dirt and gravel and so forth, the mini's not going to be getting in my way very much there. Something like our friend the druid, when he's on the base, this skirt of his cloak and everything is going to cover up a lot, and that's going to be harder to do. So, just like as I say, a personal choice. And again, with the orc, you have things like in the case of minis like this, and this is an old mini, but you have new minis that are like this too. The Reaper Bones are a good example of that, where a lot of them have the base already on them. You don't have a choice unless you want to cut it off the base and do a custom base, which is a lot of fun, but that is a different topic. So, next video, we will have a primed wizard, and we will do some very basic painting. So that's all for now. Take it easy.